What's up, guys? It's me, Coach Mills here, and with all the changes at the start of Season 3, the meta has dramatically moved and shifted around, and the core of every meta is the tank role. So we're going to break down exactly what tanks are the best and the worst that you should be playing and coordinating around, depending on your other picks. And yeah, we're going to break it all down, but do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe if you enjoy the content, and let's jump right in. So we're going to break down the tiers of each character, talk about characters that work well with these tanks, and also just overall talk about compositions and the meta. Now, first off, let's talk about Orisa. Orisa did receive a rather big change that happened in the start of Season 3 with the nerf to the damage. Now, that still doesn't fundamentally nerf what Orisa's very good at. Living for a very long time, making it so that you can just basically zone away any other tank or DPS and create a ton of space or claim a ton of space. Because of Orisa's really low cooldown amount, the amount of time each cooldown comes up, she's just really strong, and that hasn't changed. Now, there are some characters that can exploit Orisa, and we'll talk about that in a bit, but just as a base level or like a type 1 meta, not talking about a counter meta or anything like that, Orisa is incredibly strong on like every non-Koth map, I would say. And some Koth maps, she's still really good. But a lot of payload maps, she's fantastic. A lot of push maps, she's fantastic. And objectively, she's S tier, for sure, S tier. Now, as far as the DPS that you want to play around a Orisa, I would say that most of them are pretty good. I think you could play like an Ashe, you could play Sojourn, you could play Junkrat, you could play Hanzo. You're not necessarily going to want to play anything that wants to dive in and coordinate a dive, because of course you can't do that, but that can be variations in the DPS's playstyle, right? The Tracer can just play to try to capitalize on pressure and go for solo picks or like to chase down a Kiriko. Doesn't necessarily have to play like a dive, right? But yeah, I would say that Orisa is just really strong in the brawl, really strong in the poke. As far as supports that you would want to play with in Orisa, I would say pretty much anything could work. I mean, you could get away with a lot of things. Of course, Lucio doesn't really work all that well with Orisa. I think it's better to have Zen, Kiriko, Ana, Zen, Mercy, Kiriko. There's a lot of different combinations you could rock. But yeah, let's keep her in the S tier for now. Now we're going to move on to the next tank on the list, Diva. And the same things apply to Diva that has always applied to Diva, okay? Diva is powerful, but not busted. She's good, but there's nothing about her that's inherently broken, and there's typically a tank that can, I guess, deadlift a bit more. Now, I think that Diva is better in this season than she has been in the past, because there are maps where she can take the high ground. New Bonnie right now is bugged, so it's not in the map pool, but it will be soon. And that's a great map for Diva. I do think that Diva is also like good at just peeling for snipers, so she's pretty good on the sniper maps as well. You could play her on like Havana with a double sniper map, I believe. And also, you could just play her in a dive composition. But like I said, Diva is just a fine character, perfectly capable of grinding and climbing to high rank, but not necessarily something that is going to just be the most absurd thing you could be playing. I would say high A, low B is where I'd put Diva, and I'm going to put her at high B, low A is where I'd put Diva, and I'm going to put her at high B. Now, as far as like the type of compositions you could play with it, like I said, you could play like a more poke double sniper composition with like a Mercy Zen with a Diva, and Diva's primarily just trying to peel. You know, peel off tracers, peel off the enemy team, distract the enemy tank, stuff like that. You could also play her in a more traditional dive composition with like a tracer, maybe a Pharah Mercy, something along those lines. Next up, let's talk about Junker Queen. Now, Junker Queen is decent depending on how much of a tank diff it is. I think Junker Queen is really great at kind of going in, ignoring the front line, trying to take a duel with the back line. She's great at brawling, and especially if you have DPS that want to come in and brawl with you. I think Junker Queen's fantastic with like Cassidy, fantastic with even a Junkrat at times. Very good with like a Reaper, but ultimately she's rather weak compared to a lot of the roster. She's very exploitable. A lot of tanks can just beat her in the 1v1 and just basically make her life a living hell. And she doesn't have fantastic DPS matchups. Like, she can't do anything to flying characters. She can't do anything to long distance characters. like Widow or Hanzo. She can't do anything to tracers. So yeah, she's really looking to like, one, ignore the tanks most of the time and go brawl something, but she wants to brawl something that is like specifically doesn't have mobility. So she wants to brawl like a freaking Cass on the front line, or she wants to brawl like an Ana somehow. I mean, you could definitely get her to work, but I think that overall, she's just not really even the best brawler right now. And yeah, I'm going to put her, I think I'm going to put her in the C tier. I think you could make an argument for C or D. I'm going to put her, you know, relatively higher up because we're seeing a little bit like not maxed out Kiriko pick rate. And when they're not playing Kiriko, your ultimate is like one of the best ultimates in the game. In addition to that, I think that, like I said, if you are like better than the enemy tank, or your team is slightly better than the enemy, Junker Queen can enable like a brawl team to just completely steamroll. And I think that a Junker Queen rush with like Junker Queen, Lucio, and Reaper is actually pretty good. It's actually pretty strong. But anyways, let's move on to the elephant in the room, or should I say the hamster in the room, Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball is like a menace. He's just a freaking menace. And I for one, have always thought that Wrecking Ball was actually pretty good. I think he's really strong, really hard to kill. And now he's even stronger and even harder to kill. I mean, he can leave the battle for just a little bit, come back in, and he already has a huge chunk of health. He's very, very, very strong. And yeah, he's really great to just kind of delay the enemy team, play like a more disruptor style when he doesn't have necessary follow-up. So like, let's say you're playing with like a pocketed Ashe, pocketed Sojourner, Widowmaker, something like that. You could play Ball just to contest, be disruptive, knock people out of position, even slam the enemy team if they're trying to go for your team. You can do all that on Ball. And if you have some more traditional dive, you know, characters that are going to follow you up, Pharah Mercy, Echo Mercy, Genji even, Tracer, you can slam, and then you can set up those slams with follow-up. Even Soldier, you know, can take an off angle and set that up. Of course, you're not going to be able to peel, like, fantastically, and I think that Ball is a character that either wants supports that can kind of fend for themselves, or like a team that can kind of protect themselves. So if like a Kiriko is fantastic with the Ball, of course. Mercy, of course, if she can go with someone else. Even Zen is okay, but it's more of an all-in composition. If you're playing a Zen, the Zen is gonna just like die. Like if you have a Zen on your team, but if the Zen discords a target and a Ball and Tracer go on that same target, that target's just dead. Like just straight up just killed. So it's like a give and take in that regard. As far as the DPS you would want to play, like I said, you could play a lot of different DPS. I wouldn't suggest any of the slower DPS with Wrecking Ball. Like I wouldn't. And what I mean by that is more spatial denial. So like characters like Mei, characters like Junkrat, and Symmetra and Torb, these characters don't really combo with Ball like at all. They have a really hard time playing with Ball. They can never, like, it's harder for them to control space. These characters would much rather play with like an Orisa or something like that rather than a Ball. With Ball, you would rather, like I said, play Sojourn, Soldier, Genji, Tracer, Echo. Even snipers are okay, as long as you have a decent composition to go with it, like a Zen Mercy or something as well. But yeah, Ball is a character, and this is very, very important, that can be countered. He can be countered. And talking specifically about his power level, there are compositions that can like ignore the Ball. If you're playing like a support composition, Kiriko, Lucio, you have a Mei on your team, you have a Reaper on your team, you have a high damage composition with like Cassidy, you have a Roadhog, you have a Doomfist to just disrupt. There's a lot of characters that you can play that will make a Wrecking Ball not able to live. You can make his life a living hell, but a lot of people in ranked will not swap appropriately. There are certain compositions on the flip side that will never, ever, ever be able to kill a Ball. Like if you're playing Genji freaking Widowmaker, you're not killing a Wrecking Ball. I don't care if all of you shoot at it. You're not killing it. And that's the problem right now. Wrecking Balls are getting a ton of free value in ranked because players are just not countering it. Now, will this placement stick? We'll have to wait and see. But right now, for ranked, Wrecking Ball is S tier, specifically because players are not adapting to it. I think even once players do adapt to Wrecking Ball and actually learn to counter this character, just because of the nature of ranked, still Wrecking Ball is going to be very powerful. But even past that, still think Wrecking Ball is powerful enough to be like at least A tier. So we're gonna have to see where this character, you know, ends up. I think that the fact that Sombra is in the meta is like as a natural counter to Wrecking Ball is just like a good way to like checks and balances a little bit, kind of like the same dynamic as like on a Kiriko, or I guess actually not so much because these are like more even rivals as opposed to like this being a very feast countered relationship. But regardless, I'm putting Wrecking Ball in the S tier. And yeah, let me know how you feel about that down below. Next up, let's talk about Zarya. Zarya has some good matchups and some really, really bad matchups. I think that Zarya is really good against characters like Ramach, or fairly good against Ramach. Really good against Orisa, like fantastically good against Orisa. Really good against Diva, of course, as long as it's not a high ground map. Really good against Junker Queen. But very, very weak against certain characters as well. Like, you can't really do anything against the Wrecking Ball. I mean, you can, like, bubble his engagements, but that's pretty inefficient in the long run, because it's not going to get him killed, and you cannot CC him in any way. Of course, you're very weak against Winston. You're okay against Doom, I would say, depending on how you play around him. And Sigma on some maps can kind of zone you out, although if he allows you to engage in a brawl, of course, you're going to be advantaged there. I would say that Zarya is fine. I think she's better, like a slightly better Junker Queen for most situations. But yeah, nothing fantastic here. I would probably put her in the B tier. I think she's good. I think, like I said, perfectly capable of climbing you up the ladder. Not something that is going to just completely deadlift every single game, and you are going to have some really annoying matchups to deal with. Once again, flying characters you can do nothing about. Long distance hit scan that are being pocketed, you can do nothing about. Tracer, you can do nothing about. You're kind of seeing you're seeing it down here. Like, really, Zarya wants to once again do kind of what Junker Queen wants to do, which is like kill, you know, mid to close range targets, find a way to get at them, and then use your bubble to just kill them. And it's not always possible when the Widow's across the map. The Tracer just doesn't care about you. I mean, you kind of get the picture. Some of these DPS can just completely ignore you, and then you're just like left brawling on the front line. And that's also not going to work if they have like a Wrecking Ball or something like that. So then what do? yeah, it can be really awkward. But if things line up, then Zarya can be really, really strong. But let's talk about what DPS you want to play with the Zarya. It's mainly DPS that want to either typically brawl, like somewhere in the mid-range. I would say like Cassidy is pretty decent. You could play Zarya with a lot of other characters. Like, I think she's fine at just playing with just about anything generally. Definitely like Cass. I think, of course, characters like Mei is actually pretty good with the Zarya. Reaper's fantastic with the Zarya. Torb, Sim are pretty good with Zaryas. And then, like, any of the other characters I think are just fine. They're fine to play with the Zarya. You don't have to have that perfect synergy. But yeah, anyways, let's move on to Ramach. Now, Ramach did get his ult changed, right? It's 20 seconds now. It's not indefinite. But he's just, like, basically the same power level. Like, Ramach's freaking nuts. Very, very strong, and I think that he's a very, very flexible character, and what I mean by that is he can play differently depending on the matchup, and he needs to play differently depending on the matchup, because Ramach can play like a brawly form where he's all about his nemesis form, where he's going in and trying to brawl. He can also poke and play more like a Sigma, where he's poking from afar and use his nemesis form purely defensively, and I think that knowing when and where to alternate those in the matchups, the tank matchups, and in the situations is the key to having success on Ramach. Because, of course, you would rather be brawling a Sigma as opposed to poking him, because Sigma's going to be a better poker. So it's all about trying to deny Sigma's range. So you're either playing further outside of his accretion range, or you're playing in and at him with your brawl. You could push past a lot of characters as well and try to go brawl the backline. Kind of like how Junker Queen and Zarya want to like go at the backline and try to get kills by themselves. Ramach can do that, right? He can, but he doesn't have to do that to succeed. He can still just poke and provide pressure. So unlike Zarya and Junker Queen, where it's like all about that setup and all about that taking space and setting up those situations, Ramach can take it, and if it's there, he can do it, but he doesn't lose if he doesn't have it, right? So because of that flexibility, I have to give Ramach S as well. These are the 3 S tier characters. Surprise, surprise, no other tank I think gets S tier. But yeah, Ramach is very powerful. I would probably say that just because of the flexibility alone, I'm going to put Ramach in the highest at the top, but I think that all of these 3 are kind of about the same. As far as what DPS are great with Ramach, kind of same thing. You know, pocketed DPS are perfectly fine. Characters that want to protect you are perfectly fine. I think you could play pretty much everything. Same thing as Zarya. You can really get away with like truly anything with Ramach. Yeah, of course you do want some frontline pressure. I would not suggest playing like double diver with Ramach. Do not play like Tracer Genji with Ramach or something like that. But for the most part, most DPS will work. As far as supports, I think that all the supports are perfectly fine. Mora is probably the worst of them because she just doesn't really provide that much utility towards Ramach specifically. And, you know, sometimes Ramach needs some help to get bailed out, or she would much rather have a Suzu to get bailed out of a bad situation, speed to get into optimal position, nade to help in the tank 1v1, Discord to help poke the poke battle. Like, these types of utility are far better for Ramach and their tank mirror than just having more healing, right? That's not really great utility. Brig also not really that fantastic with Ramach, but you don't really play Brig for Ramach, right? You don't even really play Brig ever for the tanks. The majority of the time you're playing Brig for your other support or your DPS. So that's kind of irrelevant. You're choosing to sacrifice utility that will help the tank in the 1v1 to utility that will help your other support and your DPS instead. And that's just the trade-off that you take. But let's talk about Rein. Because Rein got a pretty fat buff, right? Rein got a pretty fat buff. Unfortunately, Rein's still not that great. For a lot of the same reasons that Junker Queen is not that great. And it's really just down to how does Rein interact? So if Rein can get into his optimal range and just start to beat face, he's pretty good at beating up tanks, right? He can beat the hell out of a lot of tanks. A lot of these tanks have ways to not do that. Like, if a tank plays poorly and pushes up aggressively, sure, a Rein can beat them up. Like a Ramach that's going in when they should be going in. An Orisa that's playing way too close. A Zarya that goes in without their bubbles. A Diva that doesn't fly and take the high ground. These players are exploitable with a Rein. If you're a good Rein, you can climb all the way to Grandmaster and beyond because of this. But it doesn't mean that these tanks should be dying to a Rein like that. And think about the DPS matchups with a Rein. How does a Rein do anything to a lot of these DPS? These DPS can completely outrange a Rein. One of the best reasons to play a Rein is, you know, you get to enable some of this mid to close range DPS. Characters like Cassidy, for instance, I think are phenomenal with a Reinhardt, or on maps that allow you to brawl, you know, a Reinhardt with a Lucio speed boost, and a Mei or a Reaper or a Sim. There's characters that you can utilize. But, you know, that only goes so far. I think Rein is like the god tier brawler, but unfortunately, like, as you have kind of noticed, Brawl is just not really that great right now. And yeah, I would say that he's either like low B or high C. I think that if you're a fantastic Rein, you can dominate. Don't get me wrong. You can definitely dominate the lower end rank you are. But as you get into higher elos, and we're talking about a meta tier list here, which is mainly top down, Rein is just not, he's just not it. He's just not it. He doesn't have the means to get in and brawl in the same way that he did in Overwatch 1. And realistically, without some way to close that gap, oftentimes he's just, you know, his shield value is getting nothing. That's the thing. His shield value is not really doing anything. Most DPS are just completely ignoring a shield. They're just flanking. They're taking off angles. They do not care about a Rein. Rein cannot stop them in any meaningful way. So yeah, I would say, you know, he's somewhere around here. Unfortunate for Rein. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't let this stop you from playing Rein. Like I said, if your opponents are making key mistakes, Rein can just charge in, smack the shit out of them, and shatter the enemy team. And that's going to happen a lot. So don't let that stop you from just being an anti-Rein player, but I will tell you that Rein is still not anywhere close to touching this S tier. It's not even close. It's just, it is what it is. Let's talk about Roadhog. Roadhog is a weird one because I think that Roadhog actually has decent matchups with some of the top tanks. Like, he's not great against Orisa, of course, but he's decent against Ramach. Whole Hog can, you know, kite away the Ramach ultimate and just kill people straight up. And of course, he's fantastic against Wrecking Ball. So as a counter pick, I think he's pretty decent. But as just a isolated character without the ability to one-shot reliably, he's not that great against everyone else. Like, he's actually better against a lot of the tanks he was decent against, but he's not great against, you know, pocketed DPS. He's not great against shutting down or trying to one-tap people. And you could, especially trying to get some of those cheeky hooks off, while you can definitely do damage first and try to hook off normally or use the special tech to get the one shot, it's not possible when you're doing like a really max range hook or you're on the high ground or something along those lines. And that all adds up on the character. I'm going to say that the character is actually a little bit underrated. But I would say more of an anti-meta pick as opposed to like good on his own merits. Something that I would say don't main, but have it in your back pocket to whip out when your team just keeps freaking dying to a goddamn Wrecking Ball. Whip this character out and you'll be fine. Let's talk about Doomfist. This is going to be kind of a controversial one. I think that Doomfist is really strong, and it's really down to the matchups. Doomfist can play a very, very specific style against a lot of these Wrecking Ball compositions, and it's a disruptor comp. You're not going for any targeted kills unless they're right there in front of you. It's all about your slam. You're slamming tracers. You're slamming Wrecking Balls. You're even punching Wrecking Ball as they come down because you can stop their slam. You're being very disruptive and just preventing them from doing anything, and that's really, really powerful. On top of that, I think you have a good Ramach matchup. It's good. I mean, it's not like the best in the world, but I think it's slightly positive. You have a pretty bad Orisa matchup, so yeah, let's not talk about that. But Diva's fine. Zarya is okay. You have a fantastic Rein matchup. I mean, it's probably like the most lopsided tank matchup, I would say. And you have a pretty decent Junker Queen matchup. So as far as matchups are concerned, you know, you're pretty strong. But it really comes down to how good you are at Doom and how can you shift your playstyle. When you're up against some compositions, like I said, the Wrecking Ball composition, it's more about disruption and brawling. When you're up against some compositions like an Orisa comp, if you're trying to play Doom into those comps, it's about going in and getting a key pick off and getting out. So it's more about getting your charge punch as opposed to just brawling and disrupting. Now, what DPS work really well with this, what supports work really well with Doom, useful for a lot of things, but mainly DPS that can help to either bait out Suzu or follow up on a bait up, follow up on the bait of Suzu. So if you have even a Genji, Echo's fine, Tracer's good, you know, DPS that can take advantage of the fact that you get a huge punch and they're in the back line and they're all weak and they don't have Suzu or something along those lines. Some DPS are not going to be able to do shit about that if they're just playing in your back line. But Tracer will, Genji will, Echo will. So these are the characters that I would say are really good with Doom. But also, that's for the more dive-oriented playstyle. For a more disruptor playstyle, it's okay to just play a more punish style and you can kind of be flexible with the DPS picks. For support, I think a lot of them are good. Once again, Mora kind of gets the short end of the stick. You can kind of feel how I think Mora helps tanks because she just doesn't really help tanks. Her utility is doing damage, which a Doom to set up for team fight wins would much rather have, you know, a Discord or a Nano or someone that can peel, someone like Lucio that can peel for his team. Kiriko that can come and take off angles, bait out key utility that Doomfist can take advantage of. Even a Brig that can pack. But anyways, I think that Doomfist is pretty good. I'm gonna put him in A tier. Now let's talk about Sigma. Sigma's great. He's kind of in the diva category a little bit, where he's not like overpowered or meta breaking, but I think he's really, really strong on enough maps. If Diva had more high ground maps, like if there was a ton of high ground oriented maps, I think Diva would probably be better than Sigma. But in the current state of things, with all the push maps, with all of the payload maps, there are some maps like even Havana being added in where we're playing double sniper. Sigma's fantastic against. If you save your accretion, you save your rock, I called it accretion before, I don't know, I called the other thing accretion, but if you save your rock specifically for engagements by, you know, the enemy Doomfist, for Nemesis form, for Wrecking Balls coming in, for any character that wants to close the gap, you just conserve that utility, you deny that, and then the rest of the game you're just basically poking out. Sigma's fantastic. He's really, really, really strong, and I'm going to put him actually in the A tier. I think he's right. He can be played with so many different DPS. He's probably the worst DPS to play with any sort of diver. Even like Far Mercy, Echo, Genji, Tracer, Sombra. Like, he's not great with those DPS. You can make it work, but he's not great. But he's great with like Cass, Junkrat, Hanzo, Widow, Ashe, Sojourn. Even Sojourn's okay. So yeah, there's some DPS he's fantastic with, and as far as supports are concerned, I think this is the best tank to play Zen with. It's the best tank to probably play Bap with. A great tank to play Mercy with because she could pocket like a sniper. Okay with Kiriko. Probably the worst tank to play Lucio with. Probably if you're a Lucio main, but you want to flex every once in a while, I would not suggest Lucio for a Sigma. Just because you just don't want to speed him around anywhere. There's no point. In fact, yeah, Lucio gets enabled the best when he's playing with like Orisa, Ramatra, Zarya, Rein, Junker Queen. Those are like the ones that he enables the best. Or even like a Winston, you know, going in with the dive. But we'll talk about that right now. Moving on to Winston. Now, Winston's interesting because I think that Winston is secretly much more powerful than a lot of people feel like he is. And it really comes down to the fact that Winston is hard to play. He's much more hard to get value, or it's much harder to get value with him than opposed to Wrecking Ball. Where Winston has to kind of play coordinated, play around his team, play more in a coordinated dive, as opposed to Wrecking Ball kind of being like the solo cures diver, right? Like, Winston is the coordinated diver. the high rank coordinated or scrim diver, and Wrecking Ball is kind of like the solo queue dive. That being said, I think that Winston is actually good against a lot of Wrecking Ball dive compositions. You could put a lot of pressure on enemy supports. You could put a lot of pressure combined with a Tracer on like Kiriko, on Mercy, characters like that. Very good against, Orisa, just ignoring their Orisa. You dive past her, you kill her backline, and then you kill the Orisa last. Has general decent matchups against a lot of the characters in the game. If you're good enough at Winston, you could play around just about anything. But Winston is a little bit more linear in the compositions you can play with. As opposed to Wrecking Ball, I think Wrecking Ball can play with all kinds of compositions. Winston, not so much. Winston is like, I would rather have characters that are coming in and diving with me. I do not want to be playing Winston with a freaking Cassidy. I do not want to be playing Winston with a Junkrat. You don't want to be playing Winston with a Mei. You want to play with like one sniper, potentially like Widow, and then divers. Sombra, Tracer, Genji Echo, Mercy Pharah, Soldier 76, something like that. For those reasons, even though I do think that ultimately Winston will be probably better than Wrecking Ball in scrim play. I might be wrong about this, but I believe that that will be true. For ranked and just, how the game is playing right now, I'm going to put him here. I think that this is my tank tier list. I think that my logic is pretty clear. You might disagree or agree with some of my picks, but this is where I ultimately put things. I know that the Reinhardt thing is going to get some people sad. Some people are going to think that Rein is really, really good. And why, like I said, Rein can be great, but he's better the lower in rank you go. I think that once you start getting to players playing, like just play a Rein, just try and play a Rein up against a freaking Wrecking Ball composition that is playing like a Tracer Pharah. Just do it one time and then come back and tell me that Rein is fun. No, I'm just kidding. Rein is fun, but there are maps where he's going to be good, and there are players he's going to be good against, and it is what it is. But yeah, this is my tier list. Let me know if you agree or disagree with me in the comments down below. Thank you so much for coming by. Smash that subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.